CiC, and I'm going to be hosting it and moderating it alongside Milena, who's you can see her on screen as well, and our lovely panelists as well. What I'd like to do right now is firstly pass to Milena very quickly, who will introduce herself to you, and then I'll take it back and do the introductions of our panelists. So Milena, can I ask you to quickly introduce yourself?
You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so happy Friday, everyone. I think it's a really nice topic. Thank you for being here to close the week off. And I really want to thank CiC for giving me an invitation for this event. It's a chance for me to meet our lovely panelists and learn from a very diverse experience that they bring with them today. My name is Milena, and I live in Munich, Germany, and I'm a HR professional, been for 15 plus years in very different HR roles, working in different parts of the world, in big corporations, startups, and so diversity, inclusion, mental health, more and more. This has all been a part of my daily life and a topic of interest. So happy to be here. Thanks, Arva.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Milena. So as you all know, today's webinar is on celebrating our differences with specific focus on diversity and inclusion. What does that actually mean for all our panelists here based on their personal life experiences as well as their work experiences as well, and to actually share some strategies, ideas from what they've learned along the years. And, because what I'm really hoping is that all of you go away with something to think about, to reflect on, and maybe, embed in your everyday life, whether it's on a personal level within your communities or even in the workplace. And within this conversation, we'll try and touch about growth and innovation as well, that how does diversity and inclusion actually impact that? So we've got quite a diverse group of panelists, and for me personally, it's very exciting. So I'd like to first introduce you to Claire Sawyer. So Claire, if you can just put your hand up over there. Thank you. So Claire is a project lead for Universal Support Program, National Engagement and Communications. And she brings to the panel nearly 30 years of experience in leadership roles spanning, I'm not sorry, guys, I could just hear a buzzing sound. Apologies. So Claire brings nearly 30 years of experience in leadership roles spanning operational delivery, policy projects and programs in the Whitehall, as well as leading projects in the charity sector, public bodies. She's currently leading national stakeholder engagement and communication for a 1.4 billion government major program. And she's also an associate member of the Coaching Association, is also a leadership coach, an advocate for change, and passionate about challenging the status quo. I've personally worked with Claire historically, and probably one of the most charismatic women I have met who really can make a difference in work as well as on a personal level as well. So thank you for that, Claire. Next, I would like to move on to Ramses. If Ramses, you can put your hand up as well. So there is Ramses as well, and Ramses is the Diversity and Inclusion Advisor at UNICEF and is an award-winning writer and consultant specialized in transgender inclusion. And what for me is interesting is that Ramses brings a wealth of experience and has hosted and supported workshops, training, educational panels for various brands and companies. He's been interviewed by BBC, Steam Radio, Reuters, Open Media, is a published writer as well, and he's also publishing a book right now. So he's going to speak a little bit about that. And Ramses is also going to share with us later on his personal life experience as a transgender man as well, and the impact in his work life and personal life as well. So thank you for joining us, Ramses.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Cheers. Next is Doug. Hi, Doug. And Doug is the Global Workday Product Lead at GetHere. He's originally Australian, and he's passionate and committed to diversity and inclusion. and he's worked in, in a whole range of sectors, including finance, startups, and public sector over the last 20 years. And he's quite a leader and innovator of the human resource center systems. He's qualified as a member of the CIPD. He's worked in employee relations, strategy roles, and I think his experience on this panel will give it that one extra bit of information for us to go back and think about for strategies that we can probably embed in our own workplace on a day-to-day level. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we've still not been able to get Soraya in, so I will not introduce Soraya at the moment. Last but not the least is the youngest one on our panel, and that is Mikhail Khan. So Mikhail, if you could just raise your hand for everyone as well to see. And he has just today graduated from Durham. He's a law graduate now, so congratulations. He's just completed his bachelor's degree in law. And throughout his academic career, he's been striving for diversity, focusing on social mobility through various programs that improve welfare and integration for marginalized members of society. Long term, he wants to work for the United Nations or an NGO because he's passionate about human rights and champions for diversity. And he is the youngest one on our panel, and the interesting questions from him will be coming later on as to, what should the workforce look like for a youngster about to join the workforce. So that's going to be an interesting one. I can see lovely Soraya has managed to join. Thank you, and welcome back, Soraya.
Thank you.
So Soraya is the commercial manager at Money and Pension Service, which is an arm's length body of the DWP. And Soraya is Turkish and comes from a diverse work background, having worked in various positions across food production companies, whether that be Turkey, UK, housing associations, policy, practice, transformation, and all. But the key thing that we're going to focus on, where all of you will hear her experience of managing a team which spoke 28 languages. So, that is where I'm quite interested that Milena and I bring that information out for all of you and all. So I won't say much more, but what I'd like to do is maybe we go straight in to ask Claire her first question, and then there is a slide that I've created, but maybe I'll break it up a little bit and we'll go straight in to ask, the question from our very first panelist. So Claire.
Hello.
You're the lucky one.
As always.
Yes, as always. Before I just ask that, if anyone has questions, please put it in the chat. Claire Neal is one of CIC's staff members. She's supporting me. She's going to keep a track on the questions being asked, and we'll come to it at the end. We're going to try and unmute the mics towards the end if people want to ask verbal questions, but at the moment, please start putting your questions in the chat. So Claire, I think my question to you is that, you obviously, I want to know what is it that diversity and inclusion means for you personally as a professional and on a personal level. And over the years, because you've worked in, different sectors and the civil services as well, what are the changes that you have seen over the years?
Okay, thanks so much, Ava, and delighted to be here with my fellow panelists and the rest of the attendees. I guess I'll cover my personal perspective in terms of what does diversity mean to me. I'm thinking about my vast career in the civil service and beyond. I guess from a personal perspective, I think diversity for me is that enrichment of different perspectives, thinking about how that translates into sort of policy decisions and the difference that I can make as a leader within the environment that I work in. And I think for me, my experience has been that from a personal perspective, diversity has been mixed economy. And also, I guess it's interesting, as I've transitioned through my career, I've witnessed varying degrees of openness around diversity or how that's applied in practice, which is quite interesting to see evolve. And from a kind of a work perspective, I've seen over the years that we've moved, and we've always been, as most civil servants have always been, focused on ensuring that, you know, the policies that we develop are translate and operationalized into something that affects the people that we're here to serve. And it's always been the fact that that has happened. But actually, over the years, I've seen how that's translated into kind of policies around HR and how that is reflective on recruitment and ensuring that actually there is a cross section of diversity in specific leadership roles. So I think if you look at some of the statistics, you will have lots of diversity in kind of more lower grades.
Right.
But where you have at those sort of senior decision points, less diversity. So not to suggest that we are there yet. I think there's lots of sort of movement, lots of sort of shift change, but actually, how does that really translate into seeing that sort of diversity at more senior grades?
So thank you for that, Claire. And I just wanted to ask you a follow-up with that. If you personally had a magic wand, you know, what is it that you would want changed, which then you could witness the positive impact it has on mental health of people in that environment as well, and the long-term impact on productivity and growth? So if you had that power, what is it that you would immediately try and do as the quick wins?
I would certainly look at the type of people that we attract into the organization. And I think there is a richness and diversity, and thinking about myself, you know, I'm neurodiverse and I'm obviously, you know, a Black woman. So I think it's about actually how are we attracting those voices into the organization that can influence in the right way the decisions that we need, and to really see that real shift change in the operational, sorry, I can't even speak today, operation of what we're trying to achieve. Because actually, if we look back, I think there's a missing element of having the right people, a golden thread through all of those kind of key decision points and areas of influence. So I would say make it an attractive place to work, for one. And people like to see people who reflect themselves, and for them to hear those journeys. So I think that's really powerful. So I think it's about actually how do we be more innovative and creative about bringing in the right people, but not only bringing them in, but actually retaining them. So I think there is, when I think over my career, the people that I saw at more senior levels, most people have left, and not everybody stays in one department. You know, there are opportunities beyond the civil service, but I think it's about actually creating an environment where people want to say they feel rewarded for their talents, and it's recognized in that sort of motivation and enthusiasm. So I think just to be a bit more creative in terms of how we bring people in and retain good talent.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think I will pass to Milena at this point. I mean, for me, the biggest takeaway from that is that, you know, it's one thing to attract the diverse people to come and join, but it's about the retention, which is about your inclusion. And that's where the diversity and inclusion comes in, Claire, isn't it? And all that, you know, just bringing them in is not good enough. That's 50% of the job done. But now it's about how do you retain them? How do you make the environment inclusive enough where their diversity can be heard and creativity is fostered? So great, thank you. But Milena, yes, I'll pass it to you.
I think this is a great segue to the next question, Doug. I really, you know, you've been an HR professional, so everything Claire mentioned, attraction, hiring, retention, making sure that we share the stories, we have the platform for that, that we have the right people. So what's the right mindset? You've seen it all, so you've been participating in, you know, I've seen you introduce a global platform across 9+ countries, working with international teams. So just very high level for you, how do you see that diversity, inclusion, and then mental health impact productivity at work? So how does that help it? Yeah.
I think this is a great question, and thank you for inviting me to come along and have a chat. And I think you're flattering me there slightly with my huge experience there, but it's nice to hear that though. I guess the grey hair counts for something sometimes. But no, in all honesty, this is a really important and passionate topic of mine too. Is inclusivity too? Because for me, actually, what it really means is success, and I can say that from something that I've just done recently at Get Here there, which is implement an HR system across many countries, and from a company that was based in Turkey, which is a culture which I had sort of not a huge amount to do with. I only really visited as a tourist there. But then when I look at, like, assembling the team that we had to do the project with there, it had to be internal. We were not like a hugely sort of, financially, strong company there. So we had to do, make do with internal teams there. So we had to draw from all sorts of teams across the world, including from Turkey there too. But as it became like really apparent, and I think this is like a really good point there when it comes to productivity there, is that it seemed like success could have been from the safe bets, let's call it that. So people who have implemented the system like myself, or people who have worked maybe in like a Western country and we had access to all the information. But in this case, the project was not like that. It really was very much like we had to understand what the home market was. And the home market there was Turkey. And understanding, sort of like the cultural differences there. So I couldn't really breathe in there and sort of say, this is the way that we do it here in London, because it doesn't always work that way. So for me, at a very, very sort of, kind of like high level there, success is what that diversity meant for me in that project there. But going back, I guess, to my like kind of longer experience there, I mean, I've walked into kind of situations where the diversity wasn't valued like that. And I've had to come in and try and be a champion for that sort of diversity within the team there. But I think another really good important point, something that I've seen emerging, especially in some of these blue chip corporate companies there too, is this recognition that mental health is also something which people need to start talking about. And I think the step one that I honestly saw, and especially some of these financial firms there, was just a discussion. So we're not talking about kind of solving the world here, but it's having a discussion in a forum about sort of recognizing that this is a factor in people's lives. And I think companies really, and organizations that I work for, had shifted from that's a home life issue to suddenly, actually, this is something that is happening within the organization or the business there, and we need to chat about it, and we need to find out why it might be happening, for one, and working out what it does to productivity there. And I can honestly say, as a manager of a team, and lots of teams in the past too, it's about making sure that people feel valued, and making sure that they don't have that kind of like stress to come in and sort of pretend, who they're not. And also recognizing those skills there and making sure that if they don't feel valued, if they don't feel like they're being productive there, that we're creating that environment for them to do that. And for me, it's really passionate to say that. And I think going back to that environment, people have good and bad days. I think everyone does. No one's always on top form, as much as I'd like to be. But it's about having that environment to say we're going to recognize that people can have good and bad days, and making sure that we have those conversations, or the channels, the groups, whatever it is, to support people when they're not particularly firing on all four cylinders.
Great. And can you just share quickly, just very, I know that, the work that you've done has been intense timeline, as you said. We didn't have, there was not a like unlimited amount of resources, et cetera, et cetera. So people did, it did take toll on their, their mental health, and, how they, so what was your like concrete action? What did you do with your team to make sure, what did you say to them, like to make sure that they can signal to you when things get rough, and when you need to like figure out, how to get out of the negative circle?
I think it's a great question too. And look, sometimes I rely on some of the traditional stuff that probably a lot of you guys would already see at the moment. They're one-to-ones. And I think that's a really important thing, very old school, as they might say, is that you actually make sure you spend time with your team. And also working your way up too. So I always like to make sure I preserve time with my manager there too, so I could relay information, because sometimes the stress was coming from the guys at the top, and we had to make sure that they knew that us as a team there, we might be under stress there. So I think preserving that one-to-one time, even if it was like super busy, got 10 minutes, let's have a chat there. And the other thing too is I like to not have a very hard agenda here. I like people to come in there and just have the time to talk about what they need to talk about there. And I think more importantly too is that if they needed to reach me, one-to-one was not the only time there too. I might be busy, and unfortunately I was, But it was always making sure that my channels were always open there, even if it was in like channels like Slack, which is horrible sometimes. You get thousands of messages in the Slack channel there. It's just making sure you go back to people straight away and say, I hear you. I might have time now, but I do hear you, and I want to make time when I can. So I think that's like the real traditional ways to do that. But I think, in all honesty, too, finding time to laugh about stuff too. I'll be honest, because the stress was sometimes enormous when we were working at Get Here. But we found ways to kind of still stop, have a laugh. And if it was a Friday afternoon, people joined a Zoom call or whatever it might be there. And we could actually just talk about stuff that we're doing outside of work too. And that really helped. And it kind of created that environment where people wanted to come in and they really wanted to work within the team.
Thank you, Doug.
Amazing. Thank you, Doug. Arva, did you?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you. This is great. I think I love the fact, listen, be open, learn about, how different cultures and countries do things. And then just, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just open up for conversation, right? And success then follows. Sureya, I think it's a good way now to introduce you. As we said, you said you've managed at 1.45 people with 28 languages. It must have been a great challenge and probably exciting times as well for you. So can you give us a little bit of insight? What was that challenge, and what did you do to make sure that this hugely diverse group feels like they're at home, right? They belong, right? So
I think it was, like you said, it was the most entertaining, educational, and also challenging times of my career. And you have mentioned that I have quite a diverse jobs that I have been, just keep changing every 10 years, something new. I think one of the things at the start of it, that we were 2P'd into one big organization from different things. So there is this emotional burden that comes with it. So anybody who has been 2P'd in and out of an organization, they would recognize that. So there is a bit of a heartbrokenness was in there. Then there was a bit of who is this woman to tell us what to do? We have been doing this job bit. But one thing was amazing. We had to comply with a certain quality assessment framework. One of the things was actually replicating the society or the community that we were going to help, and it was part of the supporting people scheme once upon a time. Nowadays it is social prescribing between navigation services. So it was amazing, the replication of the community of London, one of the London boroughs. So that was great. We were getting this star plus. One of the things was, English is a second language for the communication for your stakeholders, among the colleagues and the customers. That brings amazing misunderstandings, curveballs, boundary pushing, and everything else comes with that. We just started to have cultural awareness sessions every other week. Everybody was bringing some food. I just made it compulsory. I said it is not negotiable. So I said I'm democratic up to a certain level. And let's just eat and share our food, because food is magic for me. And then I said, okay, let's just talk about some proverbs and idioms coming from your culture and how you can translate it into English. Because I had it some years ago in one training. They asked us the idioms of over the hill, and they said, what do you understand from that? So for my English speaking colleagues, that it is very clear, but it was very interesting at the time. For my Turkish English understanding, it was over the hill for me, something you achieved and you reach the where your destination is. Where somebody said, oh, if you describe somebody over the hill, it's a negative. Interestingly, my Portuguese speaking Brazilian colleague had the same understanding and I had. So we were just going through that proverbs, which is, it gives you the deep of your culture and understanding. So everybody was saying, so if I say you something like this, so you may understand me that way. And don't forget, this is around food. It is always lots of things. There is a bit of a pleasure, it's a bit of a learning. But I had clicks, and I'm not saying that it happened overnight. That took a year, good year. And also we were working in community, so we weren't sharing office environment, so interaction with each other quite limited in that sense. So I had to force them to come to team meetings, have their one-to-ones with their group managers, team leaders. And like Doug said, however busy you are, I was all open to come and talk to me. One thing I said to them though, when I had trainee officers going through the health and social care certification, I said, people will be talking about me to the young people. And I said, I don't want to know what. I said, there will be things that would said about me negative. There will be things said about me positive. I want you to make the judgment about your colleagues and myself, but I don't want to hear anything. And one young person, I remember coming 1 month later, how did you know they are talking about you? She said, that's very naive, I think. I said, people do talk, that's normal. But I think one thing is about listening to people, hearing their own burdens, hearing, understanding where they come from, because we were helping vulnerable people. We had angry stakeholders why we were not reaching for that individual where we want to achieve. We had internal personal things, internal conflicts between the people, how they just want to do the job. I think recognizing one and then let's just move on from there. So that was the main thing for me.
Powerful.
But it was, these people are still, most of them are in my life, by the way, after all these years later.
Brilliant.
Nearly
That's
10 years
great.
later,
Brilliant.
that is, they are. And I'm going to meet some
Amazing.
of them on Saturday.
Oh, good. So
Yeah.
you're
Yes,
still
yes, yes.
learning about
More
other
than
cultures.
more than half of them are still in my life. Some of them left the country, moved into different places, but it is my proud time.
Great. I love
Brilliant.
the power of language, how you introduce that, and let's discuss
Yeah.
idioms. And through that, we learn about where we came from, what are the patterns, and how we
Yeah.
differ.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I will take this away with me definitely. Thank you, Arwa. I will pass
Yeah,
it on to you
thank
to
you.
continue.
And I think it's quite interesting what you said that, we also need to understand the burden of people and what they
Yeah.
carry. And actually, that feeds in really well now to my question to Ramses, if that's okay. And I'm sure, Ramses, the audience here, the panelists, and myself would be really interested to understand a little bit about your lived experience and personal story. And I do want to thank you that you've agreed to share it, which I can imagine cannot be easy. So, my question to you about that is that as a transgender man, what challenges did you face in the workplace and the impact of this on you at a work level and on a personal level as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a bit of context, I grew up in southern Italy. I first came out as trans to my friends when I was 13, but didn't come out to my parents until I was 18, which is when I found out I had received a scholarship to come study in the UK. So I moved to the UK on my own 1 week after my 18th birthday. In August, started university in September, and then I just fell in love with London and decided to stay here. And I remember even back when I was completing the application for the university and was getting all my documents ready, the first thing that my parents told me was make sure not to write anything weird down there because you don't know how people will react. So I basically, put down everything as female. I use my dad's name for everything. And I feel like I kind of like carried the mentality with me for a while. So even after realizing that London was more inclusive and, there was through of like universities and most of the workplaces where I worked, there was also always the fear of how do I know if this is safe enough for me to say
Yeah.
that I'm transgender, to present as a man. And there's also the issue with, documents not always matching. And depending on when someone is in terms of their medical social transition, that's just kind of that question that keeps sitting at the back of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
And even when I hear from some of my trans friends applying for jobs, that's always the main question people ask. Like every single WhatsApp group chat, every Facebook group, every time I work with young people, the first question is, so do you write that you're trans on your CV? What name do you use? Do you wait for the interview? Do you wait until you're hired? Do you wait until the probation period is over? And it's one of those questions that always upsets me in some ways. First of all, because I've been on both ends of that. I've been the HR professional who needed to write those job ads and needed to help people with recruitment, but I was also the scared 18, 20, 30-year-old who didn't know enough about the organization to know whether it would be safe. And I think there's just this fear that I think is inevitable when you're looking for a job. There's so many unknowns. There's um, lots of things that could go wrong.
Mm.
There's like pressure as well. Sometimes there's financial pressure and financial reasons why I might be applying for a different job. That's kind of just like multiplied when you don't know how your identity is going to be perceived. And
Right.
the truth is that most of the time, when people get discriminated against, they might not even realize that that's the case. One of the things that someone was saying was like, yeah, it's illegal to discriminate if someone is disabled or is black or is an immigrant or is transgender or is queer in another way, but they don't have to tell you that that's why you're not passing the interview. They don't have to tell you that's why, the CV is getting turned down. So there's kind of like the built-in fear of like, oh, did I do something wrong? Was this actually not a good match for me? Or did I see something I didn't like? Or this was at a place that wasn't safe for me? And one of the advice that normally I give when young people ask me about recruitment, how to approach interviews, and how to approach entering the workforce, one of the things I say is that, well, if you're afraid that they're going to have a negative reaction to you immediately say you're transgender or immediately presenting as who you are, then that's not where you want to work.
Yeah.
And my advice is always to try to present yourself as you are. And if that doesn't work out, that just means that that wasn't a place where you would have wanted to work anyway, especially from a safety perspective. But I also understand how daunting that is. And I
Yeah.
think the main issue there and the main solution really is all about representation, which is one of the main reasons why I started being more vocal about my story growing up transgender. It's why I started writing about it. It's why I started, doing panels and webinars and started to get out there, because not seeing anyone like me was one of the biggest sources of the fear. um, if I had showed up to an interview and the hiring manager were a trans person, or if I known that an organization had a trans CEO or a trans, person on the exec board, then I would have known that like the place was safe enough for someone to be able to progress their career within an organization, to see themselves represented at a higher level. Likely a place where the person probably enjoyed working if you managed to get to senior level. But often I don't really see the representation, so I try to do my best to provide it as much as I can when new people come in.
Thank you for that, Ramses. And I think I just want to ask very quickly before we move on to Mikhail next is what advice would you give? Because we've got HR professionals in this attendance, but we've got managers, we've got colleagues. I'm sure all of us, including myself, would love to know what should we be doing at work? What things should be there in place? Number one is to attract, people like yourself. But number two is how do we retain them?
Yeah,
It's again comes back to attracting them, but then retaining them and making it inclusive for them. So I think the HR professionals and other managers and even other, from different professional backgrounds, you would love to hear that.
absolutely. So I think for me, it's two main things. The first one is that lots of time I see lots of surface level work. So I think like, oh, we have celebrated Trans Awareness Week, or we have a policy about transition network. But then you look at the other policies and they're not genital language. You look at bathrooms policies. You look at maternity leave. Like you look at everything else, and you realize that actually that trans inclusion, non-binary inclusion is now embedded in every level of the policies and HR, and it's not how the organization works. It was just an easy win to create a policy that would work with that, lacking response from experience to someone who was transitioning in the organization, but then it
Right.
didn't really go past that. So I think for me, it's like making sure that there isn't just one thing. Like it's great to have one piece of work, but it really needs to be something that's kind of like embedded into the whole work of the organization, especially from an HR perspective. And the other one is having that understanding of what being transgender means. not just in terms of, okay, this is some terminology, these are some things that might come up in the workplace, but in a sense of like, how does this affect someone's life in all of the different aspects of it? So things like, if there's any, for example, news, like I remember early last year, there were some news about a trans person being murdered, and I actually got an email from coworkers and from some like managers saying, if you need some time to take care of yourself, make sure that like you let us know, and feel free to take the time. Or for example, I remember when I was talking to a friend who works for a private company, for a bank, one thing that she said was that she actually had permission to work from home because they knew that being trans feminine, the commute might not necessarily be safe. So that was like an option for her to just stay at home if she wanted to, because that meant she wouldn't have to shave in the morning, she wouldn't have to put on a lot of makeup, she wouldn't have to try to have all those considerations about, okay, how do I get safely into the office and then safely back home. Or things like not having to have the camera on during meetings, because if you're having a particularly dysphoric day, you might not want to stare at your face for 8 or 7 hours. So it's kind of like those small things, and I think you can get aware of those things just by talking to people and actually being in those communities and having conversations about what are the things that you need. Because for things like policies, you will find every guidance that you might possibly want, online, or books, on any resources. But those small things are things that usually people with lived experience will think of, but it would
Sure.
be very hard for other people to predict.
Thank you for that. There was one more question, but I'll store that, which is more. I think I'll keep it if we've got time, which will potentially be opened up to all of you. But that's about the use of language. That people are uncomfortable asking questions, whether that's to the gay community, whether that's for transgender, whether that's for the Black community. People just get nervous, they get uncomfortable. Am I going to offend them? Am I going to upset them? What if I say something wrong? So let's see if we have time to come to that question. So I'll just park that right now, but that's, I think, will be quite keen to just get some people's input into that. But Mikhail, I'll come to you now. So yes, so congratulations on your graduation today. You are the youngest one on our panel. So I think you're about to join the workforce. So hopefully, I'm sure your parents will hope that that's going to happen. And also, as the youngest panelist and recent graduate, what do you hope from your future employer when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for the congratulations on graduation. I'm sure my parents are hoping to get me off the bills pretty quickly, so I'll try my best. But no, I think with what I expect from my future employer is, I think relating back to what all of you guys have said, is actually a genuine commitment. I think a lot of initiatives that I've seen, and I'm talking more from a law perspective because that's where I've focused most of my experience, is that a lot of it does seem quite tokenistic. A lot of it does seem, let's just have this day where we talk about, some inclusion thing. But I think what really needs to happen is some, genuine commitment to clear policies and practices that would promote diversity at all levels. And a lot of firms misrepresent their statistics on, how diverse they actually are. I mean, linking back, I think to, I can't remember who mentioned it, but actually at senior level, diversity seems to be pretty poor in, law firms are notoriously bad at diversity anyway. But I think when you go on websites, it says, oh, we hire, 50% from ethnic minorities and all, and you think, oh, that's impressive. But then you look at how many partners are actually from, those minority backgrounds, and it's about, 2-3%. And I remember Slaughter and May, they're a massive firm. They once mentioned, I think, that it was like, oh, we've got now like 4 Black partners. And I remember thinking like, well, is that really something that we should be, celebrating? Only 4, and they're one of the world's biggest law firms. And I just remember thinking that that law especially really does need a lot of diversity. So I think the way to do it would be they actually have to listen. So as I think Ramses said, just having open communication and just speaking about things, and just making sure that as a potential, like trainee going in, or as a graduate, making sure that I feel comfortable enough to speak about something that wouldn't necessarily maybe in the past really have had that avenue to speak on things. And I even think that what some new firms are doing is having sponsorship programs, mentorship programs to support your career advancement for underrepresented groups. I do think that automatically, especially as Law is seen as like an all boys club, I do think that you need to challenge that stigma and say, and the firm's got to help you. You can't do it by yourself. The firm has to take responsibility. Companies have to take responsibility, and essentially be more transparent on their reporting, and have to be self-aware and recognize that yes, we are not as diverse as we should be, and here's how we're going to do it. So clear policy and practice, I think, is the main thing I would be expecting from my future employer.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That's very insightful.
That's okay.
I think, Mikhail, you already, you kind of summarized also what would be the apprehensions, right? Like, so what, but can you just do it the other way around? So what are you afraid of personally? Like, now you're a member of a minority, you're a minority, and then you're entering a workforce, and what are you afraid of? What is your fear?
Well, I think the most common one would be, just standard discrimination or bias. Obviously, I think, as Ramses' point, is not being hired for your background, but then potentially just saying, oh, you're not the right fit for the firm, or what. I've had feedback in previous interviews where I've not gotten the role, where they say, oh, you just weren't the right fit for the firm, but then never really knowing if, well, is that the real reason I've not been hired? Especially with firms that have maybe a potential reputation for not being diverse. So I think that's a big concern. Like I said, especially in law, with there being an all boys club, in the traditional firms as well, you'll never really know if that's the reason you've not been hired. I also think, the worry about being tokenized is a big one, in the sense of I've seen, some of my peers who are now currently already gone on to study, or gone on to train, at these firms, where they're essentially given the burden, if they're, 2 or 3 ethnic minority trainees in a group of 40, essentially them being forced to be champions for just an ethnic minority. I think that's actually quite a big concern that's not really spoken about. I think especially one thing that I'll speak about is in my current college. So university at Durham is collegiate, so there's different colleges. When I first joined, there was 4 non-white students out of 150, and I was one of them. And it was essentially like, having to kind of justify when people ask, oh, where are you from? I automatically felt, oh, I have to say, well, I'm ethnically Pakistani, but I was born in the UK. And it was kind of like, why do I feel the need to justify it? Yeah. So I think that would be a big concern in the workforce as well, is you don't want to be made to kind of, be the person that has to navigate the diversity issue. And I think the last key one would be, again, being seen as a diversity hire. I think that a big problem is that we want to feel that we've earned it. We want to feel that we're on equal standing. And I don't want to be simply being seen as, you've only got this job because you tick a few boxes. I think that's a big problem. And especially, like I said, in law, it is already so competitive to get the jobs. So you don't want to be seen as oh, well, you're only here because you're Muslim and you're an ethnic minority. I think that, again, referring back to Claire's point on diversity at senior levels, it's ensuring that you're not just seen as a placeholder, that you are there on merit. I think that would be a big concern for me going into the workforce. So yeah.
Thank you so much. So much food for thought, right? Amazing.
I think this is we chose to end with the youngest panelist, Milena, and I think I'll just share with all of you what our thoughts were. Is to actually, it's a food for thought that they're the future. Someone like Mikhail is the future. That's the workforce that we need to start thinking about. So all the decisions that we make today about diversity, inclusion, we have to make sure that we don't have another situation of suffering that somebody like Ramses went through. you know, and I'm sure we're years behind it, but at least to slowly soften it, where then eventually we reach a situation where everyone feels included, and all. But what I'd like to do, Milena, if that's okay with you, I think there's a couple of questions in the chat. So I'd like all the panelists to just have a look at that as well, and let's see what's come our way. And if we've got time, we can go back to that one question around the strategies and all. So I'm just going to...
I can read the question if you want, the first one. As HR professionals, how can we operate in a country where power dynamics and position, I don't know how to read this word, positionality are deeply ingrained in the culture, given that these factors can undermine fairness and equity within the organization, leading to stress and demotivation? What strategies can we employ to address these challenges? Anyone?
I think, Milena, you'd probably be pretty good to answer this one too, because I think we kind of lived some of this working with a Turkish company. And it was quite an interesting dynamic. Yeah. And I wouldn't say it was just purely because it was a Turkish company. It was a startup company too, with founders who had put in their own money and they started up the company. And there's some very strong views, I'll be honest, but maybe not always the views that everyone agreed with. And we thought that were going to be the best situation for the company, or whatever the solution that we were trying to do there. But I think one thing that really changed when I was working at Get Here, though, and I think this is maybe one of the strategies that you could use, is honestly just trying to look at their side of the ledger. Where were they coming from? What was their point of view on this? So some of the decisions that I found were baffling to me, I'll be honest. But I'd always think, look, some of these guys came through an organization where, effectively, it wasn't just cultural, but part of it was cultural, but it was the sense that they put their own money into it. They had their own heart into this, and they had to kind of they felt like they had a bit of a right to decide. And the tenure of just being in the company early into that situation there meant that they should have the loudest voice there. So I think for me, trying to understand where these people had sort of come from, really trying to change their mindset to constantly battle that.
And I think that's a fair point. What I'd like to do is add a slightly more spin to this. I'm not sure which country is being referred to here. So the person, Nearika, if you could put in the country you're also referring to, if you're comfortable with it, that would be great if you can put it in the chat. But also for myself, just to give you an example, I'm from Pakistan, born, brought up there, came here when I was an adult, and all, but I still do a lot of work over there. And yes, I get very frustrated that, my God, the working environment, where the culture dictates certain policies, or let's just say, okay, so you're talking about Nepal. So I'm guessing it's probably not that far off from India and Pakistan and all culturally, especially with the gender differences there and all. And at the end of the day, the lesson I personally learned, which is adapted there quite a lot now, is it's not about having your UK hat on and try and bringing about change there. Change comes in small steps. If you want to get to a level of fairness, and all, it's not going to happen overnight. It's understanding that culture and then applying the best methodologies that will suit, for example, and I'm using this as a hypothetical example, to suit the women and the men as much as you can within the cultural outfit of that organization and of that society as well. So for example, in Pakistan, there's different cities. The way I would apply it in Karachi, which is, about 25 million people, it's a financial hub, would be very different to if I had to go in and do it in a place like Punjab, which is very much, another province, and it's slightly more conservative. So it depends. You have to, in my opinion, is first understanding that culture. What is the impact that culture is happening in the workforce? Yes, if it's impacting mental health, it's about bringing in the support mechanisms first. Don't try and change the culture immediately. First, bring in the support mechanism to support those people's mental health, understand the culture of the society, understand the culture of the organization. Let those people get the support while you're investigating all of this and scoping it out. Get the people involved who are getting impacted and ask them for a solution with the society hat on, the culture hat on and the organizational hat on. And also it just depends a lot on, who is the leader of the organization. And I think I'm just, seeing someone type it. It depends on luck as well. You could actually be really fortunate and have quite a progressive thinking senior manager who will be like, I'll be your spokesperson, I'll be your champion. Sometimes it just takes one person to back up HR to implement those changes. So I think that's the one thing I'd like to share, because I've done that work and I've seen it work, but it's not an overnight fix. I will be lying over here saying there's a strategy that will fix it overnight. It doesn't get fixed overnight.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Claire was saying in the beginning. Hire the right people, right? The right people with the right mindset. And I think in those cultures, you will always find at least one person who is curious, open, listen, and then, when you kind of team up, you can influence together. But I think the key is just be curious and learn, and then you will figure out the strategies, right, on how to overcome the challenge.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, and I'm hoping that kind of answered your question, Niharika. But please feel free to reach out to me separately. I'll be staying on as well. If you've got other questions, I can speak to you separately as well. There's no problem. I'll move on to the next one, which is from Margarita, and that is: do you think remote, as in working from abroad, work policies where possible support a more diverse and inclusive workforce? As an immigrant, I find this type of flexibility key to support my mental health and work-life balance. This is referring to what you were talking about, creating an attractive workplace and apply policies to ensure employees' retention. I mean, this is really interesting. I mean, if the organization can do that based on tax regulations, legal regulations and all, I think it should be encouraged. If not full-time, at least a hybrid role between the two, it would be great. I'd love to invite someone else from the floor. Claire, I don't know what your views are on this. It would be great to hear what your thoughts are.
Okay, thanks, Zava. I can only speak from a perspective of maybe more remote working within the UK. I think going back to the period of the pandemic, I think it was proven and sort of evidence the fact that most employees were actually equally productive, if not more, having the flexibility of working from home. And most organizations have completely dispersed with their sort of central hubs, or are encouraging more sort of 40%, 60% kind of attendance in the office. I think in terms of family friendly and having the flexibility to work remotely, I think it's really important to ensure that you're recognizing the needs of your individuals and what's important to your employees to allow that flexibility. But I think there's also the balance of being able to kind of co-create and getting people in the office as teams, because I think there is something about isolation if you're at home on your own. So I think there's a delicate balance, but again, it goes back to the question of really understanding the needs and requirements of the individual. And if you can build that into your contract as part of something that's agreed up front, I think it just, if it works for the business, if it works for the individual, then I think most people, there's a degree of flexibility around that. Hopefully that's answered the question.
Thank you for that. What I'd like to do is just make you all aware that there is one slide that I was not able to share, but it will get circulated hopefully somehow one way or the other. I'm making these promises that I'm not sure about, but yes, just a few key points from that slide that I'd like to just mention very quickly is, please understand a bit more about inherent diversity and acquired diversity. Inherent is what we're born with, what we come with. That's like a race, age, ethnicity and all, sexuality. And acquired is what we acquire along the years of us growing up, even constantly, even now. For example, life experiences, working abroad, and a disability in later life and all. I was never disabled. I was very active and all, and now I'm suddenly classified as disabled. And also, it's all of these things are really key factors that we need to think about having a diverse group. What it does is diversity brings different perspectives, stimulates creativity, complex problem solving, enhanced decision making. Otherwise, you're stuck in a bubble. You know, diverse group of people are likely to generate a broader range of ideas and all. The one thing that I want to say is what a study by Gartner said is after COVID, 50% of employees, according to their research, have shifted their expectations. Majority of them are youngsters. Younger workers in the millennial and Gen Z cohorts now expect companies and institutions they work for to engage on contentious issues of fairness and equity. And I think that's what we need to think about. Yes, we know it impacts innovation, growth, financial, everything, but we should not forget that D&I, diversity and inclusion, is about increasing better work environments and employee satisfaction. So on that note, I just want you all to be aware that, you know, we're living in a world of conflict at the moment. If you look at the two biggest conflicts in the world, that is Russia and Ukraine, and then you've got Israel and Palestine. You know, think of the impact. I'd like you all to just go away and think about the impact this could be having directly or indirectly on your peers, on your managers, on people who report into you. Now, you might think, oh, this might, you know, the Israel-Palestine might not impact white people. Don't have stereotypes, don't have biases. If someone is not attached with Ukraine, doesn't mean they're not getting impacted. Diversity comes along in many ways. So think about how can you promote good mental health in your workplace by actually just staying in the moment and observing what's going around you in your society, in your culture, in your community, down the road, and in your workforce. We are in the middle of elections. You know, look at the rhetoric that's coming out from there. You don't know the impact it's having on people and the mental health. And diversity plays a key part right across that. I do want to thank everyone. There is a feedback link that Claire Neal will share. I'm unable to share the QR code. I do apologize. It's not being able to share. But Claire, if you can just share the feedback, I'd really appreciate, and Milena as well, and CiC, any feedback from yourselves, if you wanted longer, what things we missed out, how to improve, what you liked. But I do want to thank all the panelists over here for taking out time and having this very insightful conversation. And Milena, thank you from Germany to co-moderate with myself, but I'm going to stay on for a bit.
With my pleasure.
For any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.